Coalworker's pneumoconiosis, also known as black lung disease or black lung, is caused by long exposure to coal dust. It is common in coal miners and others who work with coal. It is similar to both silicosis from inhaling silica dust, and to the long-term effects of tobacco smoking. Inhaled coal dust progressively builds up in the lungs and is unable to be removed by the body. This leads to inflammation, fibrosis, and in worse cases, necrosis. Coalworker's pneumoconiosis, severe state, develops after the initial, milder form of the disease known as anthracosis. This is often asymptomatic, and is found to at least some extent in all urban dwellers due to air pollution. Prolonged exposure to large amounts of coal dust can result in more serious forms of the disease. Simple coalworker's pneumoconiosis and complicated coalworker's pneumoconiosis. More commonly, workers exposed to coal dust develop industrial bronchitis, clinically defined as chronic bronchitis associated with workplace dust exposure. The incidence of industrial bronchitis varies with age, job exposure, and smoking. In non-smokers, studies of coal miners have shown a 16% to 17% incidence of industrial bronchitis. In 2013, CWP resulted in 25,000 deaths, down from 29,000 deaths in 1990. Pathogenesis. Coal dust is not as fibrogenic as is silica dust. Coal dust that enters the lungs can neither be destroyed nor removed by the body. The particles are engulfed by resident alveolar or interstitial macrophages and remain in the lungs, residing in the connective tissue or pulmonary lymph nodes. Coal dust provides a sufficient stimulus for the macrophage to release various products, including enzymes, cytokines, oxygen radicals, and fibroblast growth factors, which are important in the inflammation and fibrosis of CWP. Aggregations of carbon-laden macrophages can be visualized under a microscope as granular, black areas. In serious cases, the lung may grossly appear black. These aggregations can cause inflammation and fibrosis, as well as the formation of nodular lesions within the lungs. The centers of dense lesions may become necrotic due to ischemia, leading to large cavities within the lung. Appearance. Simple CWP is marked by the presence of 1 to 2 mm nodular aggregations of anthracotic macrophages, supported by a fine collagen network, within the lungs. Those 1 to 2 mm in diameter are known as coal macules, with larger aggregations known as coal nodules. These structures occur most frequently around the initial site of coal dust accumulation, the upper regions of the lungs around respiratory bronchioles. The coal macule is the basic pathological feature of CWP, and has a surrounding area of enlargement of the airspace, known as focal emphysema. Continued exposure to coal dust following the development of simple CWP may progress to complicated CWP with progressive massive fibrosis, wherein large masses of dense fibrosis develop, usually in the upper lung zones, measuring greater than 1 cm in diameter, with accompanying decreased lung function. These cases generally require a number of years to develop. Grossly, the lung itself appears blackened. Pathologically, these consist of fibrosis with haphazardly arranged collagen and many pigment-laden macrophages and abundant free pigment. Radiographically, CWP can appear strikingly similar to silicosis. In simple CWP, small rounded nodules predominate, tending to first appear in the upper lung zones. The nodules may coalesce and form large opacities, characterizing complicated CWP, or PMF. Diagnosis. There are 3 basic criteria for the diagnosis of CWP. Chest radiography consistent with CWP. An exposure history to coal dust of sufficient amount and latency. Exclusion of alternative diagnoses. Symptoms and pulmonary function testing relate to the degree of respiratory impairment, but are not part of the diagnostic criteria. As noted above, the chest X-ray appearance for CWP can be virtually indistinguishable from silicosis. Chest CT, particularly high-resolution scanning, are more sensitive than plain X-ray for detecting the small round opacities. Epidemiology. In 2013, CWP resulted in 25,000 deaths, down from 29,000 deaths in 1990. Between 1970 to 1974, prevalence of CWP among U.S. coal miners who had worked over 25 years was 32%. The same group saw a prevalence of 9% in 2005-2006. History. Black lung is actually a set of conditions, and until the 1950s its dangers were not well understood. The prevailing view was that silicosis was very serious, but it was solely caused by silica and not coal dust. They decided not to raise the black lung issue because it might impede the mechanization that was producing higher productivity and higher wages. Union priorities were to maintain the viability of the long-fought-for welfare and retirement fund, and that required higher outputs of coal. After the death of Lewis, the Union dropped its opposition to calling black lung a disease, and realized the financial advantages of a fund for its disabled members. In the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act of 1969, the U.S. Congress set up standards to reduce dust and created the Black Lung Disability Trust. The mining companies agreed to a clause by which a 10-year history of mine work, coupled with X-ray or autopsy evidence of severe lung damage, guaranteed compensation. Equally important was a rate retention clause that allowed workers with progressive lung disease to transfer to jobs with lower exposure without loss of pay, seniority, or benefits. A miner who spent 25 years in underground coal mines has a 5 to 10% risk of contracting the disease. 21st century. After the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act of 1969 became law in the United States, the percentage of American miners suffering from black lung disease decreased by about 90%. More recently, however, rates of the disease have been on the rise. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health reported that close to 9% of miners with 25 years or more experience tested positive for black lung in 2005-2006, compared with 4% in the late 1990s. New findings have shown that CWP can be a risk for surface coal miners, who are 48% of the workforce. Data from the Coalworkers Health Surveillance Program of NIOSH, which examined chest X-rays from more than 2,000 miners in 16 U.S. states from 2010-2011, showed that 2% of miners with greater than 1 year of surface mining experience developed CWP. 0.5% of these miners had PMF. Most of these workers had never worked in an underground mine prior to surface mining. A high proportion of the X-rays suggested that these miners had developed silicosis. NIOSH, with support from the Mine Safety and Health Administration, operates a mobile health screening program, which travels to mining regions around the United States. Miners who participate in the program receive health evaluations once every 5 years, at no cost to themselves. Chest X-rays can detect the early signs of and changes in CWP, often before the miner is aware of any lung problems. Research work to investigate the relationship between respirable dust exposure and coal workers' pneumoconiosis was carried out in Britain by the Institute of Occupational Medicine. This research was known as the pneumoconiosis field research. The research underpinned the recommendations for more stringent airborne dust standards in British coal mines, and the PFR was ultimately used as the basis for many national dust standards around the world.